Hey y'all. So this is another game I managed to get in with the explosive growth Belittle Briar list. It's against the same opponent, just a different game. Against the same opponent as the previous video. And yeah, let's get into it. This time I'm going second. And my opponent starts with just making a rune chant. They also shackled. And then just moving to Arsenal, which is great. It's exactly what we want to see. Having to block with this hand would have been annoying since we are holding onto a Channel Mount Heroic. Yep, there we go. Opponent represents the one shackle. Okay, so we send out a Channel Mount Heroic, and now we can E-Strike, choosing draw a card, so we still get to Arsenal. So we still get an attack in, get the +3 damage from Channel Mount Heroic, and we still get an Arsenal. That is until we draw into Tomb of Harvests, which we cannot Arsenal, because then we have no way to get it out of our arsenal unless we draw another Tomb of Harvests, or our opponent CNCs us. So, very unfortunate draw there. We run 3 Tomb of Harvests in the deck, and yeah, got one of them. It's pretty unfortunate, so we don't arsenal there. But we still have Channel Mount Heroic on the field. And we came in with 8 damage, so that's quite nice. And opponent, still in character from last time, just hitting the banishes. Even the early ones. Okay, they start with a Howl from Beyond, and they play the Shadowversa that they banished, banishing a red Bounding Demigod from their hand. So the Shadowversa gets go again. I just take all the damage, the Rune Chant plus the 5 physical. Again, our turn's looking like we've got the Belittle line up, and we'll still be able to Arsenal at the end of the turn, so, you know, I'm not going to be blocking. They shackle, come in as bounding for 4. Yep, and then they make a Rune Chant and swing the Thorn. Just go ahead and take 5 there. Yep, so we go ahead and pitch that Tomb of Harvest that we very unfortunately drew. To play this Belittle, revealing Overload, find a red Minnowism. Don't need the blue, I don't need any more resources for this turn, so get the red for extra damage. Now this Belittle's coming in for 6. Having cards that naturally have Go Again and Briar is just pretty awesome when you have Channel Mount Heroic. Yep, as expected, our opponent just takes 6. And now we have the option to just break the Chane and play Minnowism and then play Overload. So Overload comes in for 9 with Dominate, and on hit Go Again. However, I actually choose to Creepers out my Minnowism here, because I don't want to rely on the Overload hitting my opponent to get Go Again, because my opponent has Husk. So, you know, they could Husk and maybe some other equipment to block the Overload completely and deny me my Rosetta swing, in which case the Husk basically blocked an extra 4, which is the Rosetta damage. So let's go ahead and Creepers out, which ensures I can Rosetta regardless of whether my opponent blocks his Overload. And since I'll be attacking a Rosetta, I will keep the Creepers around, unless my opponent blocks the Arcane. So actually, over there, it might have been better for me to, after Creepersing out the Minnowism, going up to 2 action points, it might have been better for me to swing Rosetta first, while my opponent was at higher life than me, to guarantee that the Arcane hits, rather than doing Overload first, which means my opponent goes lower than me, and they potentially could have used a blue to stop the Rosetta Arcane, making me lose my Creepers. Of course, there is another school of thought there, and I'm not entirely sure how much I agree with this, but another school of thought was that what I did was correct. Because if you agree that in the Runeblade mirror, the first person to lose their 5-card hand on the offensive is the first person to start falling behind and start losing the game, then me attacking Overload first opens up my opponent to misplay and pitch a blue to stop my Rosetta, to stop the Arcane and blow up my Creepers. Not sure how much I agree with that, but that is another line of thinking where you basically allow your opponent to misplay if you attack with Overload first, rather than Rosetta. Anyway, so we move on to our opponent's turn. They Ghostly Visit after shackling. Ghostly Visit, another thing that they hit off their banish. And then they Shadow Puppetry and a Hell Rites. This is coming in for 5, so if I want to full block this, I will need to give them a card, and I'm not giving them a card. So I let them have their on hit, hoping that they miss. But they do, because they're a guard gamer. But let's see whether they can use it, because they did not creepers out the Shadow Puppetry, because obviously they didn't know beforehand whether they were going to hit. So they might be a little low on action points here to actually be able to use the Riftbind that they hit. Okay, so they use their Arsenal Invert. Just go ahead and grab 2 random things. I take 2 Arcane. And then they swing the Thorn. Okay. And I'm debating whether I want to block the Thorn physical with my Skullcap. I think I do decide to, because I think I'm coming with a fairly decent turn on my turn. And yes, I do block my Skullcap. And my opponent took their 1 Blood Dead damage. So on our turn, we start Bramble Spark, fuse with an Earth card, and here's where Tunic is awesome in this explosive growth list. When you Tunic out a Belittle, it feels great. In this case, it lets me Tunic out my explosive growth and keep my fuse card in my hand to fuse with explosive growth. Because typically that's a card you want to pitch, but obviously if you pitch to it, you also can't fuse with it. So there's 2 separate instances of Arcane coming to my opponent. They both hit. Explosive growth triggers twice. This is coming in for 8. And because my opponent is Chane, they can block this out completely without giving me a single card, which is very unfortunate. Because, you know, if my opponent didn't block this completely, then I could flash out Force of Nature and get the card draw. Yep, but since they block it out, I mean, I still flash out the Force of Nature anyway, because I need an action point so that I can swing Thorn. No card draw, but now this Thorn is coming in for 2 Arcane, 4 Physical from the Explosive Growth triggers. So she'll have 6 damage Rosetta Thorn. Pretty nice. So overall, 16 damage represented here on our turn. And we still get to arsenal the Enlightened Strike. Okay, opponent gets another hit off their banish. And we draw into 4 attacks, which is 4 2-block attacks as well, which is not great mostly because, you know, we might be reaching the point where blocking out the Chane is a good thing to do because they're so low they start dying to their own Blood Debt. And not having any 3 blocks, or, you know, non-attack blocks too, but becomes 3 blocks with embodiments, is pretty unfortunate. But we still have a bunch of armor up, so maybe I can get away without blocking at all this turn. Oh, okay, so they start with shackling up and then banishing a Soul Reaping. And obviously, looking at my hand, I'm not going to be activating Creepers on my turn. And it's unlikely that I can even swing Rosetta next turn. So I'm looking to block with Creepers for sure. Get the extra 1 block out of it after I already got 2 activations from it, which is definitely... that's a lot of value to get from 1 piece of equipment. Yep, so I go ahead and I just put Creepers in front of this. Got a 7. No point giving them cards from my hand until I know for sure that I need to. Okay, opponent uses 1 floating to play the invert. We take 2 physical. I think that was a small misplay from my opponent, because now my Skullcap is on for the next attack that they do. Whereas they could have just waited until the end of their turn to do that. Oh, they're making a Rune Chant. And that's always something you're very happy to see. When they make a Rune Chant, it means they have nothing else more efficient to do with those resources, which is nice. Also, my opponent has not played a non-attack yet, and just from this state right now, I can tell that my opponent doesn't have a non-attack to play. So we're feeling pretty good here, so it means this Thorn is not going to be representing any Arcane. And they just come in and it's just too physical. And they're banking those blooded cards to try and have a turn next turn. So I go ahead and just block the physical with my remaining equipment. I'm not going to get another activation of Tunic, so I might as well just get rid of it. Just block with it. And here we go. An opponent has already used 2 invert existences, so we aren't even scared of, like, we don't need to be scared of a double invert killing us on our turn. So, definitely starting the turn with Belittle. The other nice thing about Belittle is that, it gets you out of your 5 all-attack hands to find you an on-attack, which in this case is less relevant. But, when you have creepers up, it can, feel really good. So given that basically all my attacks now are 0 cost, I've got an E-Strike and Arsenal, Overload and Promise of Plenty in hand, I'm just going to find a red Minimism here. There we go. Also made a small misplay by showing my opponent the Overload in my hand. I should have showed them the Promise of Plenty, because that is what I'm going to bottom with the E-Strike, and then I can finish the turn off with a Minimism and Overload, which will be 6 damage dominate, which my opponent's at 3 is probably just going to kill them. Or take their last card, which means they die to Blood Debt. Alright, opponent blocks the Belittle with a card. And that might have been because I showed them an Overload. They might have been greedy if I didn't show them that I had a dominant attack. They might have been greedy and just use equipment to block this first attack and see what comes next. But since I showed them the Overload, they know that they will need to keep 3 block on their equipment and a 3 block in hand to be able to block it. Okay, so we go ahead and E-Strike. This is now coming in for 5, and we obviously choose Go again. And they block 5 from hand, exactly where we want them. And then we go ahead and Minimism Overload. This is 6 dominate. Yep. Opponent blocks with a 2 block, blocks with 2 equipment, and then on their turn they just die to Blood Debt because they have no cards to be able to pitch. So yeah, that was the game. As expected, Runeblade Mirror is just honestly kind of just goldfishing against each other for the first few turns, and it just lasts like 3 turns. But yeah, this is a game. Explosive Growth still putting in work. And Belittle, of course, just feels really good in Briar, in my opinion. So, thank you for watching, and hope you enjoyed it.